We are very lucky to have invited three speakers who are working in the energy-related areas, spanning science to engineering disciplines, including professor, startup co-founder, and a specialist from oil company. And they will share their career paths, stories, and the career options for entering the energy fields. So now let's start. And each panelist will have a 10 minutes presentation first, and after all the three finish their presentation, we are open to the audience for whatever you want to ask. Now let's start first. Let's welcome the Professor Buongiorno, who is an associate professor in nuclear science and engineering department at MIT.
Thank you. And so good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Can you hear me? The mic is on. Is that?
No, it's not working.
Okay, I'll speak up a little bit then. We were just comparing notes. It turns out that I'm the only one who actually prepared a few slides. It must be, you know, the professor maniac for lecturing and preparing slides. So I'll give my opening remarks in this fashion. So I'll tell you in a second what nuclear energy is all about. But let me first give you the sort of the punchline. The outlook, the job outlook in the nuclear industry is really good. And let me start with two facts. First, in the U.S., over the next 10 years, about half of the workforce in the nuclear industry is eligible for retirement. So there is a great need, obviously, for renewal of that workforce here at home. And internationally, things are looking very positively. Everybody knows the big engines now for growth are India and China, and nuclear energy is no exception. There, basically, the workforce in those two countries is projected to more than double in the coming decades. So again, lots of job opportunities available out there. Obviously, they are not all for PhDs. We also need people with lower degrees. We need electricians and welders and so on. But there is definitely a pool of jobs available to PhDs in industry, academia, and government with opportunities to travel. Because by all means, nuclear, while a technology that was developed originally in the US and in the West, is now become a completely globalized business. And in fact, as I just mentioned a minute ago, most of the action is now concentrated really in the Far East. But there is something going on in the US, as I will discuss in a second. Starting salaries, just for you, for your calibration, at least in the US, if you are interested in a postdoc position, you're not going to get rich. That's true for nuclear. It's true for virtually any other discipline. Okay, so you're talking about the order of 60K as a starting salary for postdoc. But if you're willing to work in industry or national labs, it's a lot more interesting. And I'm interested and curious to hear the figures in BP and the oil industry. Of course, they have to be much, very, very attractive, very high. So over 100K possibly. So I assume that not all of you are familiar with what nuclear power is about. So I have a few slides. Bear with me. I see some familiar faces, some folks from nuclear science and engineering. For you guys, this is going to be completely boring. But for the others, hopefully, it will tell you what this technology is about. So again, the temptation to lecture is always irresistible. So nuclear power is essentially a way to exploit nuclear energy, the energy that is stored within the nucleus. Okay, so how does it work? We use the nuclear fission process. So if you have a neutron, a small neutral particle, is absorbed by a nucleus of uranium-235. It's an isotope of uranium. What happens is that this nucleus splits in two halves. That's why it's called fission. Okay, it splits in two, and in the process, you get more neutrons, which are useful because you can create a chain reaction. And most importantly, you get a lot of energy that is freed up in this process. Okay, and that's why we like it, because we get energy out of it. Now, those neutrons can be absorbed by other nuclei, and in turn, they cause more fission. And so what you get is truly a chain reaction, a self-sustaining chain reaction that continuously generates energy. If you let it diverge like this, you get a nuclear weapon, like a nuclear bomb. But if you control it, as we control it, then basically you get a nice, steady source of energy that you can use for useful applications. So why are people interested in nuclear? Essentially, it's the energy content or intensity of the fuel. A pound for a pound or a kilogram for a kilogram, whatever you want. Uranium-235 has millions of times more energy content than, say, coal or natural gas. So it takes very little fuel to generate an enormous amount of energy. Okay. Just to give you an idea, for a reactor that generates about 1,000 megawatt of electricity, that's enough to power the city of Boston. In 1 year, you only consume about 37 tons of fuel, which is something that would fit in this corner of the room. By comparison, if you were to generate that electricity with coal, you would have to fill Fenway Park up to the top. Okay? So we're talking about 6-7 orders of magnitude difference. That's why people are interested. It's such an intense energy source. It's a source of heat, essentially, and it's emission-free. It doesn't release CO2. And again, that's another appealing characteristic. Now, what you do with that heat is up to you. Now, you guys, I assume, have all taken a basic course in thermodynamics, so you know that you can convert heat into work. If you do that, and then you attach to your turbine, which is that device that converts essentially internal energy into work, if you attach an electric generator, you create electricity. Okay, and so that's one possibility. But you can just use the heat to generate some steam for factories or for district heating. It's done for residential heating, basically. You can use it to help with the conversion of biomass, corn, sugar cane, into liquid fuels, such as ethanol. That conversion requires a lot of heat. That heat can come from a nuclear reactor. And finally, you can actually inject steam underground to basically extract heavy oil, like the tar sands in Canada. So it's a heat source. What you do with that heat is up to you. But what's nice is that it's a very concentrated heat source. It's a high intensity, and it does not generate CO2. Okay? Those are the two main characteristics. So without getting into any details, the way you use this heat source is essentially you boil some water, and then you use that steam to spin a turbine, and that generates electricity. If we do it in this way, you're generating electricity. So these are nuclear reactors for electricity generation. That's basically the bulk of the industry in the US. We use nuclear power for generation of electricity. These are pictures of some of the commercial nuclear power plants in the US. If you are from these states, you're probably, you live nearby. Around the world, there is quite a bit of a distribution. Let me start actually. In the US, we have about 100 reactors, 100 gigawatt. That's about 13% of US installed capacity, but it actually generates about 20% of the total electricity. And those two, the way you square those two numbers is because nuclear reactors, because of the nature of the beast there, they basically run 24/7. So they're used for base load electricity. And so while the installed capacity may be low, or 13%, the actual generation is higher because they're run all the time. Okay. Now you see there is a big cluster of commercial power plants to the east of the Mississippi River, because that's basically where the population is in the U.S. Then the other big cluster is in Western Europe. And as I mentioned previously, this is where the growth is now concentrated. India, China, Korea, unfortunately not Japan because of the accident that occurred about 1.5 years ago or so. Okay, so we talk about this. It does not emit CO2, so that's a big motivation. In the U.S. alone, these are data from 2011. If you look at all the energy sources that do not generate CO2, that do not basically emit CO2, nuclear accounts for about 60+% of the emissions avoided. Okay, so I don't know if you have a sense for this number, but basically over 600 million tons of CO2 emissions were avoided in the U.S. alone, thanks to the use of nuclear energy. Now, the other thing that people are paying attention to is you can actually use nuclear energy to displace fossil fuels. Okay, so this chart here shows you the total energy consumption in the U.S. And you see that basically we use a lot of oil. We use coal for electricity. We're starting to use a lot of gas also for electricity, not just for heating and things of that type. And all those, of course, emit CO2, and the technologies that don't emit CO2 are here. You got nuclear, you got the renewables. Okay, so if you want to do something about climate change, if you want to do something about reducing the imports, say from the Middle East and so on, you have to basically expand this sector over here. Okay, and there are ways to use nuclear to basically displace massive amounts of coal and oil in the electricity as well as in the transportation sectors. Again, it's a heat source. If you use it, for example, to generate, turn biomass into liquid fuels, then that liquid fuel can be used in cars, trucks, and then you don't need to use oil and so on. Okay, so there is quite a bit of construction going on around the world, including some in the US. Not much. They are expensive here, but some is up there. So in fact, this is the next to last slide. Then I go back to the jobs and the careers and so on. Nuclear energy economics. So one way to describe nuclear reactors is they are expensive machines burning cheap fuel. The plant itself is complex. It has a lot of concrete, a lot of components, steel, instrumentation, and so on. So the plant itself costs a lot of money. The fuel that it burns, this uranium, because of its high energy content, actually doesn't cost much. Okay, so that's sort of the cost structure. Very different from coal and gas. For example, in gas is exactly the other way around. In gas, you're paying a lot for the fuel. Natural gas costs a lot. But the plant itself, it's small and it doesn't cost much. Okay, so these are these are capital costs. These are operating costs. So you see the structure of the cost here for levelized cost of electricity is very different from nuclear than say natural gas and coal. And I'm curious to hear about the renewables, but the numbers that I have tell me that if I were to put renewables on this chart, it would be off the chart. Okay, so right now, as of now, renewables are not cost competitive. Okay, so going back, so if that's what nuclear energy is about. So where are the jobs? Essentially, you have the electric utility industry. All those utilities that operate nuclear reactors, they do need nuclear engineers. So folks also with PhDs. And so they continue to operate commercial reactor fleet safely and economically. Of course, companies that are also building new reactors or are supplying the fuel for existing reactors, we call those vendors. These are like Westinghouse, General Electric, Areva. Some are based here in the US, others are based, Areva is in France, and then you have some companies in Japan, some in Russia, and so on. These build new reactors, ensure reliable supply of nuclear fuel. Regulatory agencies, because of the safety concerns related to nuclear industry is a very heavily regulated industry. There is a regulator, it's essentially a government agency that oversees the operation, design, construction of all these plants. And they too absorb PhDs with competence in the broad nuclear energy domain. Of course, academia. If you're interested in doing research, pushing the envelope, developing the next generation of nuclear technologies, that's done, I think, in large part also at universities, and MIT, Berkeley, Michigan, Wisconsin. We're all sort of players there. And then finally, the big national lab complex. This is part of the Department of Energy. These were the labs that were created during and after World War II. Essentially, they were mostly created to develop nuclear weapons at that time. Their mission has diversified tremendously since then, and now they basically their mission goes way beyond even nuclear. They're all over the place. But on the nuclear side, by and large, this is development of next generation technologies for commercial nuclear plants. So that's all I have in terms of opening remarks. I would close and then let the other speakers have the floor by saying that what attracted me personally to this discipline, and I have all my degrees are in nuclear, undergraduate and then the PhD, was I didn't want to be narrow. I didn't want to be only, say, a physicist or only a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer. And the thing that really I like about this discipline, nuclear, is that it's extremely broad. You have to be competent in many different areas. You have to be a little bit of a physicist. You have to know materials. You have to know heat transfer, fluid flow, probabilistic risk assessment. So it's nice. It keeps you sort of entertained in the job, whether it's academia or industry and so on. So that's what pulled me into this, and I'd be happy to take any questions after we go to the other speaker. So that's what I have. Thank you.
much less formal, I think. I guess I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about me, about my background, and then sort of close it off by talking to you about why I think MIT is a great place to be if you want to start a career in energy. Okay, my story is I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry, actually from a liberal arts college, Davidson College in North Carolina. And right after graduating there, I decided to go into graduate school for chemistry, and I was lucky enough to get into MIT. And I wanted to work on new chemistry research that would contribute to renewable energy broadly. I didn't know my specific route or my specific technology at the time. I just wanted to sort of keep the doors open and do things that excited me. And I think that's kind of a trend throughout my path so far, is focusing on things that keep me passionate, keep me excited. So I started here in 2002. I was lucky enough to get into Professor Dan Nocera's lab here at MIT. And it took me 5 years to get my PhD. And while I was here, I worked on proton-coupled electron transfer in ribonucleotide reductase. So making small inorganic complexes, shining lasers at them, looking at rates of electron transfer, oxidizing amino acids, making amino acid radicals, and watching them move inside enzymes. So very fundamental, aspects of my research were very fundamental in terms of light absorption, chemical catalysis, electron transfer, things like that, but also a little bit applied in the biology realm. But Professor Nocera's lab broadly was interested in renewable energy, so solar energy, catalysis, basically anything that involved converting sunlight into something useful, and also converting electricity into fuels. So I learned a lot. Just being in that environment really exposed me to chemistry research broadly and how it could be applied to renewable energy. So I finished up there in 2007, and at the time didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, so I did what a lot of graduate students do, which is a postdoc. So I decided to do a postdoc actually in a little bit in enzymology, because I wanted to study how active sites, metallo-cofactors, in enzymes perform their reactions, and hope that I could learn something there and then design catalysts of importance for energy transformations later. So I packed up here in Cambridge, went over to UC Berkeley, and started growing E. coli bacteria and isolating nitric oxide synthase during my postdoc. About 18 months into my work there, it was going pretty well. I think I had 1 or 2 papers that I was working on there, but I was starting to get the feeling that biochemistry wasn't where I wanted to go, and starting to think about what I wanted to do. And fortunately, Dan Nocera discovered a water oxidation catalyst in his lab and wanted to start a startup company to commercialize it. So he wanted to found the company with people that he knew knew the science really well. And so he called me up, as well as one of my fellow classmates at UC Berkeley, and we both left our postdoc and helped found Sun Catalytix. And that was in 2009. February 2009 was when we first started. So that was a really interesting transition for me, going from the academic research into a startup company. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So at that time, the goal was to commercialize this water oxidation catalyst into a new type of electrolyzer, which is a device that converts electricity into hydrogen and oxygen, and in a photoelectrochemical cell, so a device that converts sunlight and water directly into hydrogen and oxygen. So when I arrived, we had a small amount of seed funding from a venture capital source nearby, Polaris Ventures. And we really had to just we walked into an empty office, empty lab, and we had to create everything right there. So we were involved in a lot of different activities, from fundraising with other venture capital sources, as well as writing grants for the government funding. So fundraising category in general, intellectual property, crafting the patents that were coming out of MIT, working on those, as well as working on our own new patents. Developing business strategy, so looking at these two concepts for technology, seeing how they would make money, what the competing technologies that were out there, how they would do against those, as well as doing experiments in the lab. So setting up some of the basic experiments, translating those science experiments from his lab into what looked more like a technology. So functioning electrodes for an electrolyzer, PV panels that can absorb light, things like that. And also hiring. So I was fresh out of a postdoc, but I was conducting 20 or 30 phone screen interviews over the weekend and talking to a lot of people trying to hire new scientists, research associates for our company. So I would say that a startup company, if you don't know what you exactly want to do, but you want to gain new skills and grow professionally, a startup company, especially if you're in there early, is a great way to do that. So now, just to complete the story, I guess, our company is about 25 people. We're working on two areas. Our commercial focus, main focus of the company, is energy storage. So making large energy storage systems, flow batteries for the energy grid. And then we have a small research component focused on new ways to collect sunlight cheaply, looking at both conversion of sunlight and water into hydrogen and oxygen, as well as stored electricity. So that's what our company does. I'm not sure how much time, maybe 5 minutes left or a few minutes left. But anyway, I can talk to you about why I think MIT is great. So for helping you not only get a great education, but the next step in terms of moving into a career in energy. So when I was actually here as a graduate student, I was really just focused on my work here, getting a PhD, writing the papers I needed to write, doing the experiments, going to group meetings, learning about what other people were doing. But I was really sort of had my head down more than I would recommend myself now. But when I came back here to do this startup company, it was a really small space, only 3 people at that time in the company, and I wanted to connect to the community more broadly, and that's where I learned the power of MIT. So I joined the Energy Club, and I got to say that was a wonderful experience for me. I mean, there's just so many passionate, excited people in the Energy Club who want to develop new technologies at the cutting edge of energy. They recognize that energy is a problem. It's a problem for our generation, and you'll just get exposed to a lot. I remember my first year, I was, while trying to start this company, I was helping to organize a panel on renewable fuels, looking at all different kinds of biofuels, as well as some of the solar energy conversion things that Sun Catalytix was doing. So that was a great experience for me. I was able to meet people working in the industry, start making connections with other people working in the industry, as well as talking to other students and people who were closer to my age, who were getting degrees in business, MBA, who were thinking about the energy problem from a business perspective, and other PhDs with other specialities. So that was a great experience for me. Also, you guys have a great career services office. I would go to them, talk to them about what your interests are, what your passions are. You also have career fairs. A lot of the big and small companies go to your career fairs. So, polish up your resumes, put on your nice clothes, go out there, start shaking hands, talking to people. I mean, personal connections goes a long way in terms of getting into the job that you want. So I would say that the school here does a great job of providing the environment. I would just recommend that you find something that you're passionate about and then look around to see what's available and just go after it. Put yourself out there, meet people. Put yourself out there. So I'm happy to take any questions later during the question section, but thanks for listening.
now we've heard a story from nuclear energy and renewable energy. So now let's move to our traditional oil energy. Next speaker is Winnie. She's the communicates development leader at BP Oil Company. So she will give some stories about her career path. So let's go.
Okay. Actually, when Sasha asked me, thank you for asking me, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. So you're just going to hear a lot of stories from me, okay? When I first came to MIT in 1979, so don't you dare figure out my age, okay? To do my PhD, I guess I was just like a lot of you here. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, okay? This is such a great institution. There's just so much, okay? But one thing I did know was I wanted to do energy, okay? Growing up in the Philippines, our daily routine was to check the newspapers for the schedule of electricity brownouts so we could schedule our lives around it, okay? So I was acutely aware of the impact of energy on economic development. So I really wanted to make a difference. When I came here, alternative energy was really anything other than petroleum. And the most well-funded research was in coal. Okay, so isn't that funny? Alternative energy at that time was coal. Okay, although I do recall there was an MIT solar house somewhere on campus. So I used to walk around it and admire it and call it, but I knew there wasn't really any active research going on. So I did my research on sulfur emissions reduction during coal combustion. Okay, that's because the Philippines has a lot of coal. It's just very dirty. It's high sulfur. So I said, okay, here's something I can do this. I can go back and do something with it, okay? And then, of course, actually I wanted to be a professor. So I said, okay, I'll go do a postdoc, okay? So I went to the University of Delaware and I did coal pyrolysis. So my research when I was doing my PhD was funded by Exxon. My research at University of Delaware was funded by Amoco Corporation, which has then been acquired by BP. Okay, so we were acquired in 1998. So after my postdoc, I was fortunate enough to get a teaching job offer from Penn State at the Department of Fuel Chemistry. But I decided to do a research and development industrial position at Amoco. So I moved to Chicago, to the Chicago area. And I have stayed in one site for 23 years, have gone through about 7 distinct roles, all in the downstream side of the business. So for those of you who are familiar with the oil business, you have upstream, which is exploration, production, and development. You have downstream, which is usually refining and marketing. Okay, so that's most integrated oil companies are built that way. And within refining and marketing, if it's a truly integrated petroleum company, they would have petrochemicals. So BP has all those, okay? And in addition, we have an alternative energy department, okay? It's very small, but it is also one of our businesses. So within BP, 23 years, what have I done? Okay, with a PhD at BP, you can pursue what you call a technical ladder, which is increasing development of expertise in your subject matter. So you become a subject matter expert, a process advisor, a product advisor. It means you have, it's like doing a PhD every time, right? Okay, it's just, and to me, that is a dream job. Okay, that was my aspiration when I first came to Amoco. But as you look around, you realize there are a lot of smart people. It's just like MIT, right? And they only have so many subject matter experts. So you begin to explore other career paths within the company. So, so in addition to that, you're also given the opportunity to broaden yourself. So that's what I did. I am not a subject matter expert. I do not have what I call deep expertise in any one area. I've actually moved around. My first job was in coal liquefaction. So as you see, there's this coal trend, right? Okay, so I did coal liquefaction. So I did strictly R&D. And then I started going into applied research. So what did I do? I just used my background in coal conversion technology to look at what things add value to my company. So at that time, we were looking at plastics because we were a petrochemical company as well. And we had so much waste plastics. And lo and behold, plastics come from petroleum. So basically, any processes that apply to coal can be applied to plastics, right? So, you know, you just basically do the same thing. So I was doing that for exploratory research. And then I decided to move into the bread and butter of our company, which is refining, making gasoline. So what I want to tell you is it didn't really matter what my thesis was. What really mattered was how I solved problems, how I can see connections, okay? So for example, at one time we were threatened with hazardous waste listing of spent catalysts. So at the refinery, we have huge amounts of spent fluid cracking catalysts. Now, if those would be listed as hazardous waste, it would pose a very huge cost for disposal, okay? So, but there was an exception in the rule. If you can somehow show that you have recycled the waste, it would not be classified as hazardous. So as an engineer, that's really one of the things you look at. How the heck can I claim that I've recycled this waste? Okay, so some of you may, well, my background was in sulfur emissions reduction, and it was through sorbent capture. Catalysts are very porous, highly sorbent, right? High sorbent capacity. Is there any way I can recycle it in the refinery during that way? So that was one of the projects that I worked on. So as you can see, you know, what I like to say is that it doesn't really matter what you did for your PhD. Once you get into the energy industry, there's so many problems. We have so many problems that no one single person can solve them. So we really need you to come in, and in fact, the more diverse and the more off your expertise is, we welcome it, because then you have new ideas. You can actually come and contribute. So that is basically what my 23 years have been. I mean, I've done research and development. I've done technical service. So I've actually gotten on the phone. I've taken customer complaints. I've also gone on the road. I've done road shows. I've gone to speedways. I've done car demos. I've done races. So there's nothing to me that's off limits, okay? And it really is one of the things I think I learned here at MIT is to be very open, because I guess it's me too. I like learning new things every day. Every day after work, if there's not one thing I learned new, it's a bad day, okay? So, and I think that's what the oil company, you know, the traditional oil companies bring you, because it's just so huge. There are just so many people. BP is about 90,000 strong globally. Half of those people are in the US. I work in a very small, we call it a campus, because it truly is like a university. In my building are about 40 people. They're probably 40 of the smartest people I've ever met. So I kind of like enjoy it. It's like being in a small MIT because it's, you know, collegial. So for those of you who are, you know, probably on the fence about doing an R&D career, you know, I'll just say, you know, if you've never considered it, give it a try. I mean, the reason why I went into industry first versus the academic areas, because my thesis advisors, I had two of them. One was a strict academic, and the second one went through industry first and then went into academia. And it was such a wonderful combination to have them both, because I got the best of both worlds. So that's why I decided to do it. But as you can see, I never tried again for the academic world. But hopefully that gives you an idea of the many things you can do within the energy industry.
Thank you. Really impressive career path. So I think I will now leave the time for audience to ask questions about whatever you want to ask. So, yeah.
I have a question for Winnie. So you mentioned what we learned at MIT is the method to solve problems. And actually, if you try to find a job in the industry, first thing you look at for PhD, especially for PhD, the first thing you look at is if you are matching their requirements, like your background, some specific research you have done. So, like, what's your suggestion to the students here when they meet these requirements, but they don't really like have those specific requirements to meet to go to get the job offer?
Okay, so I think your question is there are some companies whose job requirements are basically very specific on your thesis research. Okay, well at BP we're not. It just so happened that when I was hired in, you know, they still had exploratory research. If I come in now with a coal, I mean, I don't know if they still do coal research, I'm sorry, but if I came in with a coal background, you know, would I get hired at BP? Probably, if I did really good work. So BP actually looks more at, you know, how well you would fit in. I mean, of course you need to tell us that I don't need to stay in this area. Because usually when you apply and say everything you've done is very let's say very biological, right? And then you come and, well, the first thing we'll ask is, are you applying, say, for our alternative energy division? Because we do have biological engineers over there. So if that's clear, then we'll try and fit you in there. But we've had candidates come in who were saying, no, I want to do something really different. Then we would consider you in a different lens, okay? It would be, you know, what would we look for you? Well, first of all, we'd look for interest. Are you really, truly interested in the energy industry? Okay, if you truly are, it will show through your passion, through the way, you know, through the way you talk about energy. But if you're not truly passionate, it will also show, because you wouldn't be able to tell me anything about my industry, right? So I think that what you should put forward is more of like, what skills did you learn? You know, so for example, okay, I'm gonna try and let's say you were, you know, in your thesis you've done a lot of modeling. Okay, so modeling, yeah, it might be of a very specific type of process which may not be, say, relevant, but we have positions for modelers everywhere in my company. So just hone in on kind of like that, you know, what aspects of modeling are you good at? And then read the job description and kind of like draw the parallel, do your homework. You know, if there are buzzwords in the job description, plop them into your resume. You know, you should tailor your resume to the company, okay? Show us we are at least special, that I'm not just like, you know, that you have the same resume for all companies, you know, because that's how we see, you know, the interest and the alignment.
Thank you guys for coming tonight. Steve, I have a question for you. I was curious how your experience at Sun Catalytix as a startup has changed as the company has grown and over time.
Thanks for the question. It's definitely changed and continues to change. So initially, you know, well, being in a startup company, you have a lot of things to do, only a few people, so you have to wear a lot of different hats, first and foremost. I think initially I was coming in as a researcher, so you know, doing the research and the technical work was the best fit with my experience, and it was actually, you know, where I felt the most natural. We had a group of advisors, you know, and CEO from the venture capital firm, so they took care of a lot of the business stuff and the strategic stuff, but they would bring me into a lot of the meetings, and I was learning how all that side of the company worked. Also, I would say that my technical background gave me a strong path into, or inclination for, the intellectual property, because I was able to see how new concepts and ideas from our technology could be protected with words in a patent. So I think I identified and started developing things that I was good at early on, and got exposed to an even broader range of tasks. And then as the company has developed and we've grown, and some things have been successful, some things have been not so successful, you know, we start choosing our path, building our team around certain technologies and concepts, And then I think my role has sort of transitioned into, one of the older guys in the company, one of the guys who's been around longer. I know I'm not that old, but so at that point it's like, okay, I'm going to hire a scientist, bring them in to work on the technology, a certain aspect of the technology that I understand really well. And I've also learned all these other aspects, like how to protect new ideas, how to manage people in the company. So then I become the person in the role of teaching these people who have really great experience with technical work from school, teaching them how to apply that into their job. So I've transitioned into a manager, and I think as the company continues to grow, they might then fill in some management positions, and I might take other positions in the company. So that it's just kind of a natural progression as the company has grown.
Thanks for recording the event. So the question is basically, what do you suggest for people who are from different departments or schools to connect with professors who want to commercialize a particular technology, and for people who want to get involved in a startup, but they don't have the maybe a platform to meet the other people who have the technology background?
Should I take this? Well, I think at MIT there are many opportunities to connect across departmental boundaries. Tomorrow we had the Energy Night. You probably heard about this. I think that's just one example, great opportunity to see who is doing what. I think these will be mostly poster presentations by students, but behind each graduate student you have faculty with their groups and so on. So that's one example. In the area of energy, of course, there is the MIT Energy Initiative, and I would suggest you contact someone there and basically take a look at the portfolio of research that is taking place at MIT within the area of research, and you will see that often attached to each research project, not to each, but to some research project, there may be a startup or a company or a business or something going on outside MIT that you could connect to. It's very open. I don't see, as faculty, I don't see any barriers between departments and between disciplines when it comes to research. The barriers at MIT are for the teaching. If you are in a certain department, you teach courses just for that department. Okay, so but in terms of the research, it's completely open. I have collaborations with folks at chemical engineering, material science, mechanical engineering, and we share students, we share results, we have patents, joint patents together, and so on. So, plenty of opportunities, the way I see it.
I would echo that, and what you said, find what you're passionate about, and then just go talk to people. I think Energy Night is a great first step. Or join the Energy Club and start talking to people, figure out who the main players are at MIT who are working on certain technologies, and then just talk to them. Talk to them about how passionate you are about it, how you can contribute to the stuff that they're working on. I think that would be a natural way to get things going.
So you mentioned that starting up a company meaning you got to take care of a lot of stuff. Probably you're not that interested in managing people, taking care of intellectual properties and stuff like that. Meetings, all kinds of meetings. Do you feel that a burden, or more like you enjoy the whole thing?
It depends on the day, but I would say if I look back at the whole thing, I would say I've appreciated it. It's been a good experience for me because it's taught me to view problems from many different perspectives. So there are many different stakeholders involved in both why our energy system is the way it is today, as well as in developing new technologies. And I think if you look at it from many different points of view, you start to really understand how complicated the problem is and how best to contribute to solving the problem. So it's been a good experience for me.
You mentioned that you didn't figure out what actually want to do or really want to do when you started the company?
Yeah, you know.
Out now, or
What's that?
you figured that out by now? Like, what you actually.
No, I'm just trying to keep my options open and learn as much as possible, and continue to grow. You know, and continue to focus on solving problems. I think for me is what's important.
Can I add to your
Sure.
answer? I think he and all of us may never really figure out what we want to do. I mean, that's the beauty of the job market nowadays. The old paradigm where you get a degree in a certain discipline and then you end up working for a company for the rest of your life doing only one thing is no longer exist. I mean, there is such a great mobility horizontally. We all know that. I mean, the remarks from Winnie were enlightening. She spent all her career in one company and changed 10 jobs. I mean, right? So there is, I think employers expect it, employees want it. So.
I think a lot of it, just like what you said, the moving around, look at it as broadening, okay? It broadens you. Whenever you take any new job, you should learn something new. It should stretch you. It should make you uncomfortable, okay? Because it's the only way you're gonna learn. Okay, one of the things you'll find out, especially in industry, is you come in the job very fresh. 2 weeks in the job, I was being sent somewhere else to notice the commissioning of a pilot plant. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what that means, you know? But it's like you figure it out, okay? Because you're going there. You are representing the company. You are hired because, you know, the company puts faith in you. They believe you can do the job. So whether you like it or not, you gotta have confidence in yourself, okay? You gotta know, it's like, because I think a lot of us say, oh, I'm not really the expert because, you know, we tend to use the word expert and reserve it for the very best, you know, number one. Well, then, of course, you'll never be an expert. But ask yourself, even within your research group, if somebody needs to know something about your research area, who would they go to? You. Then you're the expert. So that should be your definition of expert. And once you get that in your head, you can do anything, I guarantee, okay? Because every time you move to the next job, you are going to be the expert. So I think that's one of the things that we learned here at MIT, right? Very quickly, is that, gosh, I know, I gotta be the expert. I mean, sometimes it gets to some people's heads, you know, but for the most part, the people I've met around here have actually used it to advantage.
Could you make a general comment on what are the differences of working in the national library or in the college or in the industry? What are the merits and the shortcomings? Thank you.
Did you guys hear the question? So I would say in industry, if you end up working in research in industry, of course, it's very applied. It's all about seeing what's the next product that has to come out, you know, in a few months or a few years. The difference between national labs and universities is a little bit more subtle. National labs typically have big budgets. They focus on large machines, large accelerators, or you know, like the spallation neutron source at Oak Ridge National Lab, or the ITER, that's a fusion reactor that they're building in France to demonstrate the principle of fusion. So big ticket items, big machines, big budgets, very organized, large scale research. At universities, we're usually good at small, beautiful, smart, proof of principle, give it either to industry, give it to the national lab to develop it further. So I would say that's a difference, okay, as far as research goes. Of course, in industry, you have a whole other dimension, which is not research necessarily. And some PhDs, I guess, also end up doing, you know, the business side of industry. But that's a clearly different story.
I'm sorry, I have a question for Professor Buongiorno too. And actually, Americans did not build a new nuclear reactor in the past 20 or 30 years. But recently, there are 3 or 2 under construction. But anyway, the number of nuclear reactors grow extremely slowly. So what do you think about the future of nuclear energy industry, especially the stress from the public in those democratic countries like Germany or Japan? Will you think it even maybe terminate the nuclear energy industry in the future? Yeah, thanks.
But you're mixing a lot of different things here. So let me start with the US. I think you came in after my first slide. If you look at the turnover in the nuclear industry over the next 10 years, you basically have half of the workforce that will retire and will have to be replaced. Currently in the US, we're experiencing some growth, very small, as you said, in terms of nuclear energy and essentially nuclear reactor construction. But there is growth, which is news, because for the past 30 years there wasn't much. Actually, the public support of nuclear in the US is high, in spite of the accident in Japan. But that's the other part you alluded to. In certain countries, the response to the accident in Japan has been very different. In Japan itself, of course, traumatized by the accident, although without getting into any details, the health consequences of that accident have been blown completely out of proportion, but that's a different story. Nevertheless, the response in Japan has been, of course, negative. Countries that were already firmly committed to the growth of nuclear energy, such as, again, China, India, the US, France, the Scandinavian countries, and others, Brazil and so on, have actually reaffirmed their commitment. Countries that were already on the fence, that had nuclear power, but they were not committed in the long term, like Germany or Switzerland, have actually turned the other way. So it's a mixed bag, and definitely the accident in Japan has slowed things down, but I think the long-term outlook is good because we need it. I'm not here to advocate we need only, you can do everything with nuclear, but you definitely, if you want to do something about climate change and reduce the consumption of fuel, fossil fuel, nuclear has to be part of the solution. So my opinion, expectation is that in the long term is going to be good. And the job market, that was my point of presentation, is already good now, for the reasons that I explained.
So I have a question also for Professor Buongiorno, which is a two-part question. Why did you decide to go into academia? And then also, if knowing that you eventually want to be an academic, would you approach your graduate education any differently?
Yeah. So that's fantastically good question. Two reasons that drove me to academia. First is actually interaction with the students. I wanted to be an educator as well as doing research in close contact with students because it's really the students that drive me. Okay, students come up with their own ideas. They surprise you more often than not. And so I wanted to be kept on my toes. I didn't want to fall asleep on the job. And there is nothing like being surrounded by young people who are there energized, they really want to learn, that can do that. So that was the first reason. The second is that being a professor, particularly at a place like MIT, gives you freedom that is impossible, in my opinion, to find in any other job. I set my own research agenda, my schedule. I decide I decide the students that I want to work with. Essentially, you're hiring your own students, and so on. So it gives you an enormous amount of freedom, and that's something that I enjoy. I worked also after my PhD. I work in a national lab, and there it's a much more structured environment. It's probably similar to industry where you have a boss. Well, believe it or not, as a professor at MIT, you don't have a boss. You don't have anyone that you have to report there and say, I'm doing well. Not really. I mean, you do your own thing. So that's fantastic. I thought that was the...
Knowing that you want to be an academic eventually, would you approach your graduate education any differently?
It doesn't really apply to me. That was always sort of what I wanted to do, being faculty. But I think this is the same theme that echo through all our responses here. You can't plan to match this. Okay, so you're doing a PhD. Doesn't even have to. It has to be in engineering is good enough. Then you're going to be able to move from one discipline to another sector. You can go from academia to national lab to industry. I mean, the mobility really has become orders of magnitude higher than it was in the past, and so. Don't overplan because who knows what life is going to throw at you. Maybe you fall in love with a job that you didn't contemplate. So.
Very brief question. Which national lab was it?
I was at the Idaho National Lab. Yeah.
If you have more questions, you can